Have you ever wondered where someone hides a knife inside a mansion worth millions of dollars? They do not hide it under a mattress. They hide it right inside the smile of your own flesh and blood. My sister thought she could steal my company, my husband, and my pride in front of hundreds of elite guests. But she forgot one crucial rule: never corner the woman who controls the data. I turned her tragedy into her execution. Hello to the wonderful audience of Vivian Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to survive and keep creating these videos for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the description and pinned comment. My name is Quinn Ryan. I am 32 years old, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Ethelgard Dynamics. The grand ballroom of the Omni Barton Creek Resort in Austin, Texas, was suffocatingly bright. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears above the heads of America's technology elite. This was our annual charity gala, a night where billionaires, angel investors, and venture capitalists gathered to pretend they cared about the environment while quietly negotiating their next hostile takeovers over glasses of vintage champagne. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive cedarwood cologne, roasted truffles, and unspoken greed. To anyone else, it was a magnificent celebration of success. To me, it felt like the suffocating, dead silence just before a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall. It was a beautiful gilded cage, and I was its undisputed queen. I stood near a massive ice sculpture, wearing a custom emerald silk gown that felt like a second skin. Beside me stood Julian, my husband of 6 years. He was the golden boy of the tech industry. He was charming, devastatingly handsome, and possessed a smile that could disarm a hostile board of directors in mere seconds. We were the ultimate power couple. The business magazines constantly praised our perfect synergy. I was the cold, analytical brain, running the operations from the shadows, ensuring every code and contract was flawless. He was the charismatic face, charming the investors under the flashing lights of the media. To the outside world, our marriage was an unbreakable fortress built on mutual respect and immense wealth. We seemingly had it all. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung open, and my younger sister, Chloe, glided into the room. She was 28 years old, dressed in a flowing bohemian white dress that deliberately contrasted with the strict, structured elegance of the event. Chloe branded herself as a spiritual lifestyle coach. She sold the illusion of inner peace and minimalist freedom to wealthy housewives while living entirely off the massive trust fund our parents had left behind. She walked toward us with her signature innocent, free-spirited giggle. She threw her arms around Julian first, holding him just a fraction of a second too long, before giving me a brief, obligatory hug. "You both look absolutely stunning," Chloe beamed, though her eyes remained entirely cold. But I saw it. I always saw it. Beneath her wide, doe-like eyes and bright, perfect smile was a razor-sharp glint of deep-seated, rotting envy. She hated my success. She hated my discipline. Most of all, she hated that I had everything she believed she was inherently entitled to just by existing. "You look so tired, Quinn," Chloe continued, her voice dripping with artificial, sugary sympathy. "You really should let Julian take some of the load off your shoulders. You work way too hard for your own good." "I will keep that in mind, Chloe," I replied, my voice perfectly level, giving away absolutely nothing. She did not know that my exhaustion was not from running a multi-billion-dollar company. It was from tracking the rotting decay beneath the floorboards of my own home. The cracks in my perfect life did not start with lipstick on a collar or a sudden emotional distance from my husband. They started exactly 5 months ago, hidden in the mundane, endless rows of a quarterly financial spreadsheet. I am a data scientist by trade. I see the entire world in patterns, and Julian's patterns had quietly shifted. There were minor, almost imperceptible discrepancies in our joint offshore investment accounts. A fraction of a percent here, a few $1,000s there, subtly diverted into untraceable shell corporations. Then came his schedule. Julian started blocking out 3 hours every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for what his calendar labeled as executive wellness retreats. Julian hated wellness. He thought meditation was a waste of billable hours and despised anything that did not directly yield a financial return. When I first noticed these anomalies, a normal wife might have cried. She might have confronted him immediately, screamed until her lungs burned, or thrown an expensive vase against the marble wall. But I did not shed a single tear. Emotion is a dangerous liability when you are navigating a live minefield. Instead, I retreated into the cold, sterile sanctuary of pure logic. I viewed the situation not as a broken heart, but as a severely compromised corporate network. Julian was a rogue asset, and Chloe, with her sudden influx of expensive designer bags and overly familiar touches with my husband, was the most likely security breach. I did not need to ask desperate questions. I needed hard, undeniable proof, and I was going to get it. To execute a proper investigation, you do not hire a standard private detective who snaps blurry photos from a parked sedan. You hire a ghost. Exactly 48 hours after I noticed the financial anomalies, I secured the services of Marcus Vance. Marcus was an elite operative, a man whose entire career was built on quietly burying or exhuming the darkest scandals of the American upper class. He did not exist on social media. His retainer was $250,000, paid in untraceable cryptocurrency, and he was worth every single penny. I gave him 2 targets. I told him to map every single breath my husband and my sister took. It took Marcus exactly 14 days to deliver the first preliminary dossier. He handed me a secure, encrypted drive during a brief encounter at a crowded coffee shop in downtown Austin. When I plugged it into my offline laptop later that night in my private study, the last fragile illusion of my marriage instantly shattered. There were crystal-clear, high-definition photographs and videos of Julian and Chloe. They were not meeting in cheap motels. They were taking private chartered helicopters to highly exclusive, off-the-grid eco-resorts in the remote mountains of Colorado and the hidden beaches of Costa Rica. I watched them walk hand in hand along pristine shores. I saw my husband, the man who claimed he was too exhausted for weekend getaways with his wife, passionately kissing my sister against the backdrop of a 5-star wellness retreat. A lesser woman would have felt her heart break. I felt my pulse slow down to a steady, lethal rhythm. The affair was repulsive, but it was merely a symptom of a much deadlier disease. The real shock came when I opened the financial forensics folder Marcus had compiled. This was not just a crime of passion. It was a calculated, hostile corporate takeover. Julian and Chloe were not just sleeping together behind my back. They were conspiring to ruin me entirely. Marcus had managed to clone Julian's secondary phone and planted micro-audio recorders in the leather seats of Julian's sports car. He intercepted encrypted emails and recorded private conversations that laid bare their entire strategy. Julian was secretly consulting with a team of shadow lawyers to exploit highly obscure legal loopholes in our corporate bylaws. He was slowly funneling capital from our joint accounts to inflate the valuation of a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. His ultimate goal was to initiate a leveraged buyout of my controlling shares at Ethelgard Dynamics, effectively stripping me of my voting power. He wanted to dilute my equity by 30% before the end of the fiscal year, leaving me as a powerless figurehead while he assumed total control of the empire I had built from the ground up. And Chloe? Her role was the most sickening part of the entire equation. Listening to the audio recordings of her giggling in the passenger seat of Julian's car, the truth clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Once she is out of the board, we can finally breathe, Julian. She does not deserve any of it. Chloe did not love Julian, She did not want to build a quiet life with him. She was driven by a deep, pathological obsession with my life. She wanted my wardrobe, my real estate, my authority, and my crown. To her, sleeping with Julian was not about romance. It was an act of profound, malicious theft. She wanted to stand on the ashes of my reputation and declare herself the winner of a twisted, one-sided sibling rivalry she had been fighting since childhood. She wanted to prove that the brilliant, untouchable Quinn Ryan could be effortlessly destroyed by the carefree, pretty younger sister. If I had confronted them right then, if I had marched into the living room and thrown the photographs in their faces, I would have experienced perhaps 10 minutes of glorious, righteous anger. But I would have tipped my hand. I would have given Julian the opportunity to trigger his legal contingencies, potentially locking my assets in a brutal, decade-long court battle. Anger is a cheap emotion. I preferred total annihilation. So, I played the fool. I smiled over breakfast. I kissed my husband goodbye every morning. I listened to my sister talk about her spiritual journey without vomiting. Behind the scenes, however, I moved with the precision of a military strike. I quietly assembled my own private legal team, a group of the most ruthless corporate defense attorneys in the country. We worked entirely offline in a secure boardroom rented under a fake name. Over the next 3 months, we meticulously restructured every single asset I owned. We created ironclad, irrevocable trusts. We quietly shifted my core equity into highly secure holding companies that Julian's lawyers could not even see, let alone touch. I built an invisible, impenetrable fortress around my wealth, ensuring that by the time Julian tried to strike, he would be punching solid concrete. Meanwhile, Marcus Vance remained in the shadows, systematically compiling the ultimate kill shot. The final master dossier he eventually handed over was a masterpiece of modern intelligence gathering. It contained time-stamped security footage, undeniable audio recordings of their malicious planning, offshore bank statements detailing every stolen dollar, and irrefutable proof of corporate espionage. The trap was fully set. The wires were hidden in plain sight. All I had to do was wait for my husband and my sister to confidently step onto the landmine they thought they had built for me. The 6 weeks leading up to the annual charity gala were an absolute masterclass in psychological endurance. If Julian and Chloe were playing a game of corporate treason, I was orchestrating a symphony of silent destruction. To execute my plan flawlessly, I had to become the exact caricature they desperately wanted me to be. I became the overworked, distracted, and blindly trusting wife. I deliberately started taking my coffee black, rubbing my temples during breakfast, and complaining loudly about fabricated supply chain issues to make Julian believe my entire focus was consumed by the daily operations of the company. It worked perfectly. The more frazzled I pretended to be, the more arrogant they became. Julian walked around our penthouse with the smug, relaxed posture of a man who believed he had already won the war. He thought his offshore accounts were quietly swelling. He thought his shadow lawyers were successfully rewriting the corporate bylaws right under my nose. He even started offering me patronizing advice on how to manage my stress, suggesting I take a long sabbatical once the fiscal year ended. I would simply nod, rest my head on his shoulder, and thank him for being my supportive rock. Chloe, however, was far more reckless. Her fragile ego demanded constant validation. It was not enough for her to steal my life in the shadows. She needed to flaunt her perceived victory right to my face. She began dropping subtle, venomous hints, constantly testing the boundaries of my supposed ignorance. One Sunday afternoon, I found a tube of vibrant cherry-red lipstick deliberately wedged between the passenger seat and the center console of Julian's sports car. It was an incredibly expensive, exclusive brand, the exact shade Chloe wore religiously. I did not throw a tantrum. Instead, I calmly handed it to Julian over dinner that evening, asking if one of his female executives had carelessly dropped it. The brief flash of absolute terror in his eyes was delicious. He stammered out a pathetic, shaking excuse about giving a ride to the marketing director. 2 nights later, Chloe invited herself over for a family dinner. She sat directly across from me at my own dining table, wearing that exact shade of cherry red lipstick. She kept making lingering, secretive eye contact with Julian while she slowly sipped my expensive wine. "You really do look drained, Quinn," Chloe said, her voice laced with mock, suffocating concern. "You should let Julian handle the heavy lifting for a while. He has such a strong, capable vision for the future. You do not have to control every single thing." "You are absolutely right, Chloe," I replied, offering her a warm, beautifully vacant smile. "Julian is full of surprises. I am learning to let him take the lead." She smirked, taking another sip of her wine, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively watching her dig her own grave. 72 hours before the gala, I left my office under the pretense of a routine dental appointment. Instead, I drove to a dilapidated, quiet diner on the dusty outskirts of the city. The diner was completely empty except for Marcus Vance, who sat in a dimly lit corner booth nursing a black coffee. He did not greet me when I slid into the cracked vinyl seat across from him. He simply slid a thick, unmarked folder across the sticky table. "The digital infiltration is completely finalized," Marcus stated, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I have bypassed the audio-visual security protocols at the resort. At exactly 9:45 in the evening, the main projection screens in the ballroom will automatically switch input sources to my secure remote server. No one in the venue control room will be able to override the broadcast for at least 10 minutes. "And the audio components?" I asked, keeping my tone strictly professional and devoid of emotion. "Wired directly into their central surround sound matrix," Marcus confirmed. "Every single billionaire in that room is going to hear your husband and your sister loud and clear." I nodded, deeply satisfied. I reached for my purse to leave, but Marcus raised a hand to stop me. He reached into the inside pocket of his dark trench coat and pulled out a sterile white medical envelope. It was firmly sealed with a tamper-evident security strip. "I dug much deeper into Julian's personal history, just like you asked," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling, deadpan intensity. "I found a ghost in his private medical records from 4 years ago. It involves a discreet procedure he had done under a fake name at a highly private clinic in Switzerland. Even your sister does not know about this. It is the absolute final nail in their coffin." I took the envelope, sliding it into my leather bag without opening it in front of him. I drove back to headquarters, walked into my corner office, and locked the heavy glass door behind me. I turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the cold, harsh glow of the city skyline illuminating the room. I sat in the darkness, broke the seal on the envelope, and carefully read the medical document. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. It was the missing puzzle piece, the ultimate devastating weapon that would turn Chloe's grand delusion into a waking nightmare. All the pity, all the lingering familial obligation I might have subconsciously held onto, instantly evaporated into the cold air. I was no longer a betrayed wife or an older sister. I was an executioner, and I was fully prepared to turn her stolen stage into a public slaughterhouse for both of their ambitions. The present moment crashed over me with the blinding brilliance of 100 flashing camera lenses. The grand ballroom was at its absolute peak of energy. The gala had progressed exactly according to the meticulously crafted schedule. Dinner plates had been cleared by a small army of waiters, and the 500 distinguished guests were currently raising their crystal glasses in a unified, roaring toast to celebrate the 10-year anniversary and unparalleled market success of Ethelgard Dynamics. The ambient noise was a deafening blend of polite applause, clinking baccarat crystal, and the smooth jazz playing faintly through the state-of-the-art acoustic system. I sat perfectly upright at the center table of honor, wearing my flawless smile, projecting the absolute image of a victorious, untouchable corporate queen. At exactly 45 minutes past 8 in the evening, the Master of Ceremonies, a highly recognizable national television anchor, stepped up to the illuminated acrylic podium. He was mid-sentence, eloquently praising Julian and me for our philanthropic contributions, when the carefully curated script of the evening was violently torn apart. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of bohemian white fabric cut through the sea of dark tuxedos and structured evening gowns. It was Chloe. She had abandoned her seat at the family table and was marching directly toward the front of the hall with a terrifying, unhinged purpose in her stride. The private security details stationed around the perimeter recognized her as my younger sister and made the fatal mistake of stepping aside, assuming her movement was a planned part of the ceremony. She climbed the 3 carpeted stairs to the stage with the supreme, arrogant confidence of a conquering general. The Master of Ceremonies paused, offering a confused, polite smile, clearly thinking she was coming up to deliver a heartwarming surprise tribute to her beloved sibling. He even took a half-step back, gesturing gracefully toward the microphone. Chloe did not wait for an introduction. She practically shoved her way to the center of the stage, her manicured hand aggressively snatching the heavy metal microphone right out of the stand. She stood there for a fleeting second, looking down at the sea of billionaires, politicians, and media moguls. Her face was flushed with adrenaline, and her lips curled into a cruel, triumphant smirk. It was the smile of a woman who fully believed she was about to deliver a fatal strike and instantly inherit an empire. She brought the microphone to her lips. The feedback shrieked through the massive hall, a sharp, piercing sound that made several guests physically wince. Then, with a voice that was eerily steady, sickeningly proud, and amplified to echo off every marble pillar in the room, she dropped the bomb. "I am pregnant with Julian's baby." The impact of those 7 words was apocalyptic. It did not happen slowly. The devastation was instantaneous. The deafening applause and cheerful chatter were violently sucked out of the room, replaced by a suffocating, dead silence that felt heavy enough to crush bones. The only sound that broke the terrifying quiet was the sharp, distinct shatter of a champagne glass hitting the marble floor as it slipped from the trembling fingers of a prominent venture capitalist sitting 2 tables away. The collective reaction of the crowd was a synchronized wave of pure, unfiltered shock. Mouths fell open. Forks clattered against porcelain plates. 500 heads snapped toward the stage, trying to process the absolute insanity of what had just been broadcast. And then, as if pulled by a magnetic force, every single eye in the massive ballroom slowly pivoted away from Chloe and locked directly onto me. I could feel the suffocating weight of their stares. It was a toxic mixture of horror, morbid curiosity, and sickening pity. They were all holding their breath, waiting to witness the public shattering of the untouchable Quinn Ryan. They expected me to scream, to faint, to bury my face in my hands, or to run crying from the room. But I did not move a single muscle. Instead, I shifted my gaze slightly to the left to look at Julian. If Chloe thought this was a brilliant, romantic victory, she clearly had not consulted her partner in crime. Julian was completely destroyed. The blood had entirely drained from his handsome face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. His eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. He was gasping for air like a fish thrown onto dry land. This was never part of his calculated corporate takeover. Julian was a predator who thrived in the shadows, relying on legal loopholes and offshore shell companies to quietly strip me of my power before I could react. A public scandal of this magnitude, an illegitimate pregnancy announced in front of the entire board of directors and our biggest institutional investors, was a catastrophic liability. It instantly obliterated his carefully constructed image as a reliable, ethical family man and a trustworthy chief executive. He realized in a fraction of a second that Chloe had not just embarrassed me, She had recklessly detonated a nuclear weapon directly over his career. Julian's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He half stood, his chair scraping violently against the floor, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to formulate a sentence. He wanted to rush the stage. He wanted to grab the microphone from her hand and scream that she was lying, or crazy, or drunk. But his legs refused to work. He was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster unfolding around him. The silence stretched out, transforming into a living, breathing entity. The tension was so thick you could practically cut it with a silver steak knife. Slowly, the initial shock began to curdle into frantic, hushed whispers. The wives of the board members leaned into their husbands, their eyes wide with scandalous delight. The tech journalists scattered throughout the room discreetly pulled out their recording devices, realizing they had just been handed the most explosive corporate scandal of the decade. The air was absolutely vibrating with the catastrophic fallout. And through it all, Chloe stood her ground under the blazing spotlights. She did not flinch. She did not look at Julian to see his frantic reaction. Her entire universe in that single moment was narrowed down to me. She was desperately hungry for my pain. She stood tall, her chin raised in supreme, arrogant defiance. She looked past the hundreds of stunned guests and locked her eyes directly onto mine. Her gaze was utterly venomous, burning with years of suppressed jealousy and hatred. She was waiting for my armor to crack. She was waiting for my shoulders to shake, for the tears to spill over my meticulously applied makeup, and for the agonizing realization that she had finally taken everything from me. She wanted my humiliation to be the ultimate entertainment for the American elite. She thought she had backed me into a corner from which there was no escape. She thought she had played the ultimate trump card. The entire room was frozen, trapped in a breathless vacuum, waiting for the queen to fall. Chloe stood on the stage, her chest heaving with adrenaline, her eyes burning with a manic, desperate anticipation. She wanted the tears. She wanted the public collapse. She wanted me to shatter into a million irreparable pieces right in front of the most powerful people in the country. Instead, I let the suffocating silence stretch for exactly 10 agonizing seconds. I did not break eye contact with my sister. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the stem of my crystal champagne flute. I lifted the glass in a mock, graceful toast, brought it to my lips, and took a long, leisurely sip of the vintage champagne. The cold liquid slid down my throat, grounding me in absolute power. I lowered the glass and smiled. It was not a sad smile, nor a hysterical one. It was the terrifying, serene smile of a predator who had just locked the final deadbolt on a cage. The smug triumph on Chloe's face instantly faltered. Her eyebrows knitted together in sheer confusion. She expected hysterics. She expected a ruined woman. She had absolutely no protocol for absolute, unbothered calm. I blinked once, a slow, deliberate drop of my eyelashes, and shifted my gaze to the darkest corner of the grand ballroom. Back by the heavy velvet drapes, sitting alone at a small overflow table, a shadow began to move. Marcus Vance, dressed in an immaculate pitch-black suit, stood up. He did not draw a weapon. He did not shout for attention. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out a small encrypted remote control, and pressed a single button. Behind Chloe, the 3 massive 40-foot LED projection screens that had been displaying our corporate charity logo violently flickered. The bright blue screens abruptly cut to pitch black. The crowd gasped collectively, as the darkness was immediately replaced by a crystal-clear, high-definition photograph. It was a zoomed-in shot of Julian and Chloe passionately entangled on the balcony of a private villa in the Swiss Alps. Then the image shifted. It showed the two of them boarding a private chartered jet, holding hands, laughing without a care in the world. The slideshow moved with relentless military precision. Next came the financial documents. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands were projected in massive, undeniable text. Red circles highlighted wire transfers of $2 million, and then another for $3 million, siphoned directly from our joint accounts into a newly formed dummy corporation. Chloe spun around, dropping the heavy microphone to her side as she stared at the giant screens in absolute paralyzed horror. But the visual assault was only half of the execution. The state-of-the-art surround sound system of the venue, previously playing soft background jazz, violently cracked to life. Julian's voice, recorded perfectly from the hidden microphone inside the leather interior of his sports car, suddenly thundered through the massive ballroom. "We need to move faster," Julian's disembodied voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "If we execute the leveraged buyout before the end of the fourth quarter, we can dilute her voting power by 30%. I will lock her out of the executive board entirely. The company will be mine." Then came my sister's voice, ringing out with that same sickeningly sweet giggle, now amplified for 500 of the most powerful people in America to hear. "She is going to lose everything, Julian. She does not deserve any of it. Once she is out, we take the entire estate." The reaction in the room transformed instantly from scandalous shock into pure, unadulterated outrage. These were not reality television fans, easily amused by cheap bedroom drama. These were ruthless venture capitalists, powerful institutional investors, and highly conservative board members. An affair was a messy social mistake, but corporate treason, embezzlement, and a hostile takeover plotted in the shadows was an unforgivable declaration of war. The hushed whispers erupted into a deafening roar of disgust. Men in expensive tuxedos were shaking their heads in utter contempt. The chief legal counsel for our primary shareholder stood up, his face red with fury, immediately pulling out his phone to call his crisis management team. A prominent state senator sitting near the front covered her mouth in absolute disgust. Julian completely shattered. The polished, charismatic golden boy of Aethelgard Dynamics dissolved into a pathetic, whimpering mess right in front of my eyes. He fell back against the edge of my table, his hands flying up to grip his hair in sheer panic. He looked around wildly at the furious faces of his peers, realizing his career, his pristine reputation, and his entire net worth were burning to ashes in real time. In a desperate, animalistic bid for survival, Julian turned completely on the woman he supposedly loved. He scrambled away from me and rushed toward the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at Chloe. "She is crazy!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking hysterically over the rising noise of the angry crowd. "She manipulated me. I never agreed to the buyout. It was all her idea. She has been obsessed with Quinn for years. She is sick in the head. She blackmailed me into doing this." Chloe recoiled violently, as if she had been physically struck across the face with a baseball bat. The man she had conspired with, the man whose child she had just proudly claimed to be carrying, was brutally throwing her to the wolves in a frantic, cowardly attempt to save his own skin. "You have to believe me, Quinn," Julian pleaded, turning back to me, dropping heavily onto his knees right there on the marble floor. Tears of pure terror streamed down his pale face. "You know how unstable she is. She set me up. I never wanted to take the company from you." The unbreakable alliance they had built in the shadows was completely disintegrating under the blinding, harsh lights of the truth. I remained seated in my chair, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely unreadable. I watched the two traitors tear each other apart like desperate animals trapped in a burning cage, knowing the absolute worst was still yet to come. Chloe stared at the man begging on his knees. The absolute betrayal completely shattered her grand illusion. She gripped the heavy microphone with both of her hands, her knuckles turning stark white, and screamed over the chaotic roar of the wealthy crowd. "You are lying, you coward! You told me you loved me. I am carrying your child. This baby is the undeniable proof of everything we built together. I slowly stood up from my chair. The rustle of my emerald silk gown seemed to slice through the heavy, toxic air. Every single eye in the massive ballroom tracked my movement as I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the main stage. I walked right up to my trembling sister. I did not raise my hand in anger. I did not shout. I simply reached out and firmly ripped the microphone from her frozen, shaking grip. I looked at Marcus Vance standing in the back of the room and gave a single sharp nod. The massive projection screens behind us violently flickered once more. The scandalous photographs and offshore financial records vanished, replaced instantly by a highly confidential, stamped medical document from a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. The date printed at the top of the document was clearly marked exactly 4 years ago. "A child," I echoed, my voice ringing out like ice cracking across a frozen lake. "That is an incredibly fascinating claim, Chloe, because the document currently displayed behind us is a certified medical record. 4 years ago, my brilliant, deceitful husband took a private trip to Switzerland for what he claimed was a mandatory corporate retreat. In reality, he went to a highly specialized clinic to have a permanent vasectomy." The collective gasp from the audience was so deafening it sounded like a massive vacuum sealing the room. Julian froze on the floor, his handsome face turning a sickly pale shade of green. He had never told me. He had certainly never told her. He had wanted the prestige and stability of a high-profile marriage without ever taking on the actual burden of a biological legacy. "So unless you have somehow discovered a profound biological miracle," I said, leaning closer to Chloe, whose eyes were now completely blank with horrific, paralyzing realization, "that child belongs to one of the random, desperate one-night stands you had last month while trying to secure a financial backup plan. You tried to pin a stranger's baby on a sterile billionaire just to steal my empire." Chloe was completely paralyzed. Her mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. The devastating realization that she had been utterly played by the very man she conspired with hit her like a runaway freight train. Suddenly, their fragile, toxic alliance violently imploded. Julian leaped up from the floor, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage, screaming that she was a fraudulent, gold-digging parasite who ruined his entire life. Chloe shrieked back wildly, swinging her heavy designer purse directly at his head, aggressively cursing him for deceiving her. They were violently tearing each other to shreds right there on the illuminated stage, completely ignoring the hundreds of glowing smartphone cameras eagerly recording every single second of their humiliating, highly public downfall. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. My voice effortlessly cut through their pathetic screaming with absolute, chilling authority. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, my legal team has officially filed the divorce papers with the state court. The federal authorities have placed a total freeze on every single joint asset we share. Furthermore, the board of directors held an emergency, secure vote exactly 20 minutes ago. Julian, you are officially terminated from Athelgard Dynamics, effective immediately. You leave with absolutely nothing." I turned off the microphone and dropped it onto the stage. I looked down at the glittering diamond wedding ring on my left hand. I slowly slid the expensive metal off my finger. I held it up for a fleeting second, letting the stage lights catch the flawless stone before letting it fall. The heavy platinum ring hit the solid marble floor with a sharp final ping that echoed perfectly in the stunning, reverent silence of the ballroom. I did not look back at the wreckage. I turned around, my head held incredibly high, and walked down the center aisle in my magnificent gown, stepping out of the grand wooden doors and into the cool, absolute freedom of the night. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video and want to support our channel, please consider donating just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or using the link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your incredible generosity helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating more thrilling stories for you. Have a wonderful day.